Hi everyone. So as you could probably tell from the title, I wanted to cover exit opportunities for big tech. And specifically what I'm going to talk about is really people that I've actually seen from either Google or people that I know in tech go to, and the trends that I'm seeing and what they're expecting when they go into tech. So some of these you might actually go like, oh, that's kind of self-explanatory. A lot of people are going to expect that. But I know a lot of people that are watching my channel, they're trying to get into big tech. So I wanted to give that as an idea as to like, okay, after I get to big tech, what's next? And a few other things that from the most recent years, like when I'm in Google for like the past 3 years now, like as of March 14th, which is the day after this video comes out, it marks my 3rd year at Google. I have seen...
I didn't understand.
Oh, my Google Home is responding, but I have seen a shift with the types of exit opportunities I'm seeing people do, especially because over the past 3 years, it's like post-COVID and people are starting to realize that like, oh, my priorities are shifting in this generation. So yes, like the videos that you may have seen or like the content you may have seen could be pre-COVID, or maybe their priorities are a little bit different than now. But like, especially with this economy, I'm just going to tell you straight up, like what I'm seeing either at my own company or from people that I see that are at tech right now from like my friends or other colleagues. So let me tell you what I've noticed. So I'm going to start with the very plain ones that I've seen a lot of people to mention. The first one is, of course, they go to startups. So generally, and I'm not going to talk about the basic ones like, oh yeah, big tech will go to another big tech. That's generally the main path that a lot of them do, that they end up just going to another big tech company. But if you were leaving big tech, like an exit opportunity of big tech, leaving the industry or leaving that, in this case, like big tech, like what would you do? So, of course, like startups would be the number one place that they would go to. And normally the reasons why they leave is that they want either more pay or more flexibility, or they just want like some kind of reason to do their job. Because a lot of times when you're big tech, you're kind of like a cog in a wheel. You're like really small piece compared to what everyone else is doing. So a lot of them go to startups to not only are they going to be a leader of some sort, instead of just being like a piece of a tiny little piece of a feature or business, but if you're in a startup, you're owning a lot more. You're doing a lot more. It's a lot more exciting. And generally with startups, you're generally going to be with a more smaller, newer technology than big tech because they just are a little bit more risk adverse than if you were a startup. So I've noticed that a lot of people end up going to startups for that, but honestly, a lot of people, realistically, a lot of the people I know in big tech like to stay in big tech. But if they are kind of fed up with big tech, I think the biggest thing that I've seen on why people are going to startups is because they just feel like they're not doing a lot, that they feel like there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape. Like a lot of the benefits of tech is that it moves fast, but because it's big tech, and especially if your company's public, there's going to be a lot more issues with trying to do anything. So if you want to have an actual say, if you want to do anything, startups is really it. And I have definitely seen people leave to go to startups for that exact reason. So the second piece is that their own startup. So this is a little bit more rare, but generally if you're like 10, 20 years into a big tech company, you've got a lot of money and savings and you have maybe some RSUs, then this is probably what they would do next, is that they'll start their own. Like sometimes a lot of people join big tech for the sake of learning a big company and how to be in tech. And then after that, they are in a startup because they want to start their own. So generally they're using their experience at big tech to recruit people, to find people that are really good in what they do. And then once they end up leaving, they're like, hey, I want to poach you. But I mean, of course, a lot of times people get like golden handcuffs in big tech. They're like, I like the stability, I like the benefits. Sorry, I'm not really that interested in your startup. But if you have a great vision, if you work really well with this person, sometimes they might actually come with you. Especially if you're already going to be funding it too. So you're not doing it completely free. But a lot of people who have their own startup, they actually do it as a side project on top of their big tech. And then once it gets big enough, then they leave. The third one is, I think a lot of people are also realizing, and I'm actually going to mix it up with the fourth one as well. So FIRE. So that is basically like financial independence, retirement. And a lot of times that people just go to tech for money. Like, let's be real. A lot of people join big tech for the money. And when you're going to a big company for such as Google, you're there for the money, you're there for the perks. You save up a lot of money. Sometimes like if you can live in a very low cost way and just save up everything and invest in everything, by the time you leave, you could actually be in fire. And I have met a few people that have been in tech, and these are people that are like 40s, 50s. They're not at Google. They were actually at PCT, Phi Chi Theta, when I was at the national meeting. They were both in tech, and then they saved a lot of their money, and they ended up retiring at like age 40. So they had like 25 years before retirement. So now they end up doing a lot of mission trips around the world. They do a lot of travel. They do whatever they want, essentially. And that's what I see a lot of people in tech also try to do. It's not as that common earlier in your career. A lot of people that I know are earlier in their career, but to be honest, I've noticed that for fire specifically, if people have gotten laid off earlier than their original plan, sometimes they're just like, I'm done. I don't really need to work that hard. I have all my RSUs, I have my money, I have my savings. I have also, and this ties into my fourth one, is passion project. So a lot of times, if you have a passion project, you're probably working on the side, but if your passion project actually ends up being big enough, then you end up quitting your day job, and then you go and do your passion project. And that's like your job. It's not like something you're just doing on the side, like a hobby. So I have seen someone who actually quit their software engineer job, and they just became a fashion designer. So they like rented out a studio, and now they're just playing with fashion. They have a lot of savings because of their own work. So it's just another thing that like big tech enables you, is that you get the benefits, you get the deal, you get all the nice money and the RSU. So even if you're not doing anything, you still have some kind of RSUs that are playing in your own way. So that's like another thing that I've seen. So in some kind of ways, their own startup, passion project is, and maybe even fire, they're more of like big tech is enabling you to do these things. So the fifth one I was going to mention was digital nomad. So you're technically working, but a lot of times when you're big tech, you're like, I have been stuck at work all the time. This is the part where it's a little bit different. Not entirely the same though, but there have always been digital nomads, but ever since post-COVID, a lot of people are going back to the office, and they're like, you know what, I don't want to go back to the office again. I'm going to just go for a remote role. And there's actually more remote roles than pre-COVID, of course, like as everyone may have noticed by now. A lot of companies are still going more into hybrid, but there's still companies that are still fully 100% remote, or companies that have stayed remote. So if you look for those kind of roles, that's essentially what a lot of these people are doing. So they're leaving the big tech companies, because a lot of the big tech are actually requiring people to go to the office, either hybrid or all days of the week. But specifically when it comes to digital nomad, they're like, I want to go explore the world, like the pandemic is over, I could just go explore, I can make money, do whatever I want. So that's also something that I've seen. I have not seen it as much as the others, but you still have that shift because like people just don't want to go back to the office, or that in general, that they're like, during the pandemic, they moved away and they don't want to go back to the office or move closer to the office. So they're like, I'm just going to find a remote role. This one, I did not expect. I have already seen at least 3 people at Google have done this. And I was just like a little bit shocked, but at the same time, it makes sense. But childcare is increasingly expensive. And a lot of times people are focusing on working really hard, and they're focusing on like, they don't really think about, how much time it costs and how much money it costs to have childcare. So I have actually seen at least 3 people through my 3 years at Google actually leave Google to be a housewife. Something that I've never thought of before, which I thought was a little bit outdated, because I thought, if you're at Google, you're probably like, oh, girl power, you're trying to work your way up. But then if you really think about it, the cost of childcare is expensive, very expensive if you're in a high cost city like New York. But I have noticed that a lot of times that these people live in these medium high cost areas, and they're like, it's cheaper if my husband just works and I stay at home and I just spend more time with my kids or with my baby, or like maternity leave ends up being too long, and then it just becomes like you end up leaving. That tends to be the case for both the maternity leave, or that you would just realize like it's a lot of work. Because when you think about it, if you work in a big company or in tech in general, or in general, like any kind of big company, you're going to have deadlines, you're going to have people to work with, you're going to have clients or managers and employees to work with, especially if you're remote. It's a lot of work. And I have actually heard of people that work with these like moms that just came back, and they have like this brain fog. Like it's just hard for them to get back. They just have so much that they're juggling that they end up just leaving, or they end up quitting, or they even end up getting laid off just because their performances dropped down. So this is becoming something that I've noticed more. I did not, maybe it has always happened, but for me, this was the part that I was the most shocked, is that a lot of people are considering on becoming a full-time housewife after being in tech, which kind of makes sense, because imagine you're like working hard, you're making all this money, and you're like, okay, now it's time for me to have a kid. Because a lot of people, a lot of women specifically in big tech, they actually push being a mom later on because of their career. So I would assume that maybe this time it's like, okay, it's time for me to actually do it. So then they probably realize like, oh, you know what? Maybe I should actually try to focus on being a mom. And then they come back to work eventually. But that's what I've noticed, is that there has been a number of people that I actually have seen literally quit Google to become a housewife. And it's like for all the multitude of reasons I just mentioned, for cost, for time, for like maybe now it's a little bit later than they typically would have a kid, so now they just want to spend more time with their kids. So that's what I've noticed. This is the one that I think like a lot of people already kind of know, but it's not as well known because most people don't really realize this, is being a consultant. So I know a lot of people that leave a big company, specifically if you're in like a higher role, like a manager level or director level, they generally become consultants. And I have noticed this a lot more, especially for my podcast guests, actually. Like my podcast guests, they are mostly people that have retired or they left their main roles in tech or in another field, and they become a consultant or they become a coach. The coach is a lot more common within my podcast guests, but when it comes to the consultant's role, it's more like, let's say for example, you worked at a health tech company for a very long time, and then now you want to be a consultant. You can be a consultant to another health tech company or to health companies, or in general, like what they can do, or even helping people get their roles in tech. So that's another role that I have seen as well. I personally have not seen that many pop up. Like a lot of people don't really leave Google or big tech to become a consultant. It usually ends up being more of like a, I don't want to work anymore, but I will do something. So that ends up being the kind of route people end up taking. But I have mostly seen people, if I'm not talking about exit opportunities, but just in general, what they do after being in big tech, they go to another big tech company, they go to a startup, or they just end up leaving all entirely and just retire or do something of their own passion project, or become a housewife of some sort. So that's what I've noticed. And a lot of times actually when I say passion project or their own startup, it doesn't have to be a tech startup. It could be something completely unrelated, like fashion design or cat sitting, or starting their own restaurant, starting their own brand. I've actually seen so many ex-Googlers leave to start their own brand in general that's not even related to tech. Those I think are really cool, because then it shows you're multifaceted. You're not just related to just tech. You can do a lot more things than that. And I personally really appreciate people like that, because it means that you have a lot of skills, you have a lot of experience, and that you're just more than one person that works in tech. You have a lot of other cool things that are going on. So let me know down below, if you were to go into big tech, what would be your potential exit opportunity? I know a lot of people don't really go to big tech and just like broadcast like, yeah, I want to go to big tech just to leave it. But realistically, did you want to start your own company, and did you want to learn, or you just kind of like want, honestly, this is the place that I'm at right now where I want to be a big tech and I just want to sit here and just learn and do whatever I want to do within Google, because honestly, the perks are great. The salary is great. The bonuses are great, of course. And in general, I just feel like this is a great place to learn. I can go jump through a lot of roles within the same company and enjoy the food at the office. So let me know down below what you're planning on doing, or if you did leave big tech, or that you have left some kind of big tech company of some sort, what are you end up doing? Do any of these come to a surprise? Let me know down below. See you next time.